The interview lasted 11 minutes. The single mother folded her resume back into her bag, thanked the panel for their time, and walked out of the glass tower with a smile that had survived worse. She had no idea that within the hour, the company's own CEO would sprint out of the building after her, calling her name while half the office watched from the windows. Sometimes life doesn't reward the most impressive candidate. Sometimes it rewards the one who stays decent when nothing is going her way. If stories like this move you, take a second to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and follow Quiet Heart Stories for more. Sunlight was just starting to hit the kitchen window when Naomi Hale zipped her daughter's jacket and smoothed down her hair before the school run. Naomi had been raising 6-year-old Junie alone since her husband's accident 3 winters ago. The mornings always looked the same. Instant oatmeal, a quick pep talk, a hug held a beat too long, and a private promise that things were about to turn around. That promise was getting harder to keep. The landlord had called twice this week. The car had a sound in it Naomi didn't want to think about, and the number in her banking app kept shrinking no matter how carefully she budgeted. Still, Junie never saw any of it on her mother's face. Kids needed to believe things were fine, even when the adult holding their hand wasn't sure. On the walk to school, Junie chattered about a class art project, some drawing of a house with a big yellow sun, and asked if Naomi could come see it hung up on Friday. Naomi said yes without hesitation, already quietly calculating whether she could take the morning off from whatever job she'd have by then. She hadn't told Junie how close things actually were. She hadn't told anyone. Her sister had offered to help twice, and twice Naomi had said she was fine because saying she wasn't fine felt like admitting she'd failed at the one thing she refused to fail at. Today's interview was supposed to fix all of it. A mid-level operations role at Holloway Systems, one of the biggest firms downtown, paying enough to finally get ahead of the bills instead of chasing them. Naomi had ironed the one blazer she owned 3 times, rehearsed answers in the bathroom mirror after Junie fell asleep, and printed her resume on the good paper from the drugstore. She practiced her handshake in the elevator mirror on the way up, telling herself this was the one. The Holloway lobby looked like something out of a magazine. Marble floors, a wall of glass looking out over the city, employees moving with the kind of confidence that came from never once wondering if their card would decline at checkout. Naomi sat in the waiting area for 20 minutes past her scheduled time, watching 2 other candidates go in before her, both in sharper suits than hers, both carrying leather portfolios instead of a manila folder. She told herself it didn't matter. It was what was inside the folder that counted. It wasn't enough. The panel was polite but distracted, checking phones, glancing at the clock, one of them stepping out halfway through to take a call. They asked about her last corporate role, and she had to explain, again, that her experience came from running logistics for a community food pantry, not from a firm they'd recognize. She watched the moment their interest cooled. They explained, kindly enough, that another candidate had more direct industry experience. Naomi nodded, thanked each of them by name, and kept her composure until she was safely in the elevator, where she let herself exhale for exactly 3 seconds before straightening her shoulders again. On her way through the lobby, she noticed an older man in a maintenance uniform frozen beside an overturned supply cart, folders and small tools scattered across the floor, his hands shaking too badly to gather them. A security guard walked past without slowing. 2 employees stepped neatly around the mess, deep in conversation about a quarterly deck. Naomi didn't. She knelt down without a second thought, gathered the papers back into some kind of order, and found the dropped hinge pin from his cart while rolling near the elevator bank. She popped it back into place using a paperclip from her bag, checked that the wheel turned freely, and helped him ease the cart against the wall so it wouldn't tip again. The man thanked her, his voice a little unsteady, and asked her name. She told him, shook his hand, and told him to take it easy for the rest of his shift. Then she walked out into the afternoon without a second thought, already thinking about what she'd tell Junie about the interview. Outside, she counted the bills in her wallet. Enough for the bus, or enough for Junie's favorite cereal. Not both. She chose to walk the 2 miles home instead, past a bakery she couldn't afford to stop at and a bus stop bench with an ad for a vacation she'd never take. Halfway home, Her phone buzzed with a text from the landlord. She didn't open it. Not yet. She wanted one more block of not knowing. Back inside Holloway's systems, something was already moving. The maintenance worker Naomi had helped wasn't just staff. He was Desmond Ruiz, a founding partner of the company who insisted on doing round himself twice a month. No title, no announcement, no one on the floor recognizing him except the handful of longtime employees who knew better than to treat the maintenance carts like they were invisible. Desmond straightened up slowly, collected himself, and instead of heading back to his usual rounds, went straight up to the executive floor and asked for 5 minutes with CEO Theodore Cross. He described the woman who'd been turned down for a job upstairs but still stopped, without being asked, to help a stranger everyone else had walked past. He mentioned that she hadn't recognized him, hadn't known there was anything to gain from kneeling down on that floor. He talked about her calm under pressure, the way she'd checked the cart well before leaving instead of just handing back the papers and moving on. Theodore listened without interrupting, because he'd built his entire career on one belief. That character was the one thing a resume could never fake, and the one thing his hiring panels kept forgetting to look for. Curious, he pulled the interview footage himself and watched it twice. He saw solid technical skills, clear answers under pressure, 3 years managing logistics for a nonprofit food pantry with a shoestring budget, and a stack of glowing references from people she'd volunteered alongside while raising a child solo. The panel had scored her down for one missing box on a form: corporate tenure. Nothing about judgment. Nothing about integrity. Just tenure. Theodore sat with that for a long moment, then pulled up her contact information and stood up from his desk. He didn't call his assistant to handle it. He didn't send someone downstairs to fetch her. He went himself, walking fast through the lobby past the same panel that had just rejected her, ignoring the confused looks, then breaking into a flat run once he hit the sidewalk, tie flapping against his chest, security trailing 2 steps behind, try keep up without looking like they were chasing their own boss. Employees pressed against the ground floor windows, phones half raised, trying to figure out why Theodore Cross was sprinting down 5th Street in the middle of a Tuesday. Naomi was 3 blocks away, replaying the interview in her head, wondering how she was going to explain another rejection to Junie without letting the worry show, when she heard someone calling her name. She assumed it was a mistake, someone calling for a different Naomi, until she turned and saw a man in a suit jacket, out of breath, waving for her to wait. She almost kept walking. It took him saying please for her to actually stop. Theodore caught his breath, hands on his knees for a second, then straightened up and apologized, not for the outcome of the interview, but for letting her walk out of the building without anyone upstairs noticing what she'd just done. He told her plainly that she hadn't been the most experienced candidate in that room, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But what she'd done for a maintenance worker she assumed was a stranger, with nothing to gain and no one keeping score, told him more about how she'd run a team than any interview answer could. Naomi didn't know what to say. She asked, carefully, if this was some kind of joke because she'd had a long day and didn't have room for one. Theodore shook his head and told her it wasn't the original operations role he was offering. That job had already gone to someone else, and he wasn't going to undecide that. Instead, he offered her something bigger, a spot in the company's leadership development track, full benefits starting immediately, a schedule built around school pickups and parent-teacher conferences, and direct mentorship from 2 of his senior directors. He told her plainly that he'd rather build a team around people who noticed what everyone else ignored than people who simply had the right resume. Naomi cried on a public sidewalk, in front of a stranger's dry cleaner and a bus stop bench. Not over the salary, but because for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had looked past her circumstances and actually seen her clearly. She thought about the unopened text from her landlord still sitting on her phone, and, for the first time all day, wasn't afraid to open it. That night, she picked Junie up with a grocery bag full of things they hadn't been able to afford in months, including the cereal with a cartoon tiger on the box that Junie had been asking about for weeks. They made pancakes for no real reason except that hope deserved a celebration, and Junie drew a second son on her art project that evening, insisting one wasn't enough for how good a day it had turned out to be. Junie didn't know her mother's biggest win that day wasn't the job. It was proof that kindness still counted for something, even in a building full of people in a hurry. In the months that followed, Naomi threw herself into the role. She stayed late without being asked, learned every name on her team, including the ones nobody usually bothered to learn, the overnight cleaning staff, the security guard on the loading dock, the intern everyone else forgot to invite to lunch. She led the way she'd raised her daughter. Steady, patient, paying attention to the people easiest to overlook. Slowly, that attitude spread through her department, then past it. New hires started noticing that the woman running their onboarding remembered their names on day one. A junior analyst who'd been too nervous to speak up in meetings found himself, months later, mentoring someone even newer because Naomi had taken the time to ask him what he actually wanted out of the job instead of just what he could do for it. Desmond stopped by her desk sometimes, still in his maintenance uniform, and the two of them would talk for a few minutes about nothing important. He never let her thank him for what he'd done, insisting all he'd done was tell the truth to someone finally willing to listen to it. Theodore would later say, in a leadership talk to the company's newest hires, that promoting Naomi was one of the best calls he ever made, not because of what it did for morale, though it did plenty, but because it reminded the whole company what they were supposed to be measuring in the first place, long before anyone opens a resume. If this story stayed with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs it today, and drop a comment below. Type kindness travels if you believe one small act can quietly change someone's whole future. Life rarely turns on one big dramatic moment. It turns on the small ones nobody's watching. A mother helping a stranger when she has every reason to just keep walking. A founder willing to speak up for someone with nothing to offer him in return. A CEO willing to look past a scorecard. A kid drawing a second son because her mom finally smiled again at the dinner table. Success was never only about the title on the door. Sometimes the door that closes on you is just clearing space for the one that was actually meant to open. And sometimes the person running after you isn't chasing your resume. They're chasing who you are when you think no one's looking.